Hey there, listeners and viewers. This is Nick Feutz from Lead-Based Studios. Welcome to my channel. I'll be showing a video demonstration on very basic human anatomy. This video will not cover basic shapes, but it will apply them to the human figure. So if you don't know how to draw cylinders, boxes, and triangles, don't worry, I can cover those in a different video, as well as lighting and three-dimensionality of the shapes. However, this video is for very basic study of the human anatomy. So if you want something more advanced, there will be more videos later. So let's get started here. Alright, now as I usually get started, I've got my paper in front of me. This is a very basic setup, just 8.5 by 11. I'm going to start off by sort of drawing the head. Just a simple oval at the very top of the page. Again, not too large. I'm just sort of gauging from top to bottom about how tall the character is going to be. Very standard pose, straightforward, standing there. I'm not really transferring the weight anywhere, so I'm finding the middle. Halfway between the top and bottom, that middle right there will come in handy for the waist. What I'm doing right now is sort of drawing in simple shape of the neck, just straight vertical lines down, and a triangle underneath the oval to sort of simulate the gap right in the throat area. So I measure out the box for the rib cage, which usually they say is about 3 heads wide, but as you'll notice, it's about maybe 2.5 wide. But for right now, that rib cage is just simply a stand-in box. When I end up adding the shoulder tissues later, this tissue right here, it'll actually start to widen out that measurement, and so the ratio of head to shoulders will look a bit more normal as it comes to 3 heads wide. So now I'm going to build the triangle to simply stand in and represent where the hip box will be. Again, the crotch area sort of tapers to the center to a pivot point where both legs will come from. I find about halfway between the waist and the feet, and that's about where the knees fall. And then the lines falling down for both the upper leg and the lower leg are sort of bowing and curving outward. So I start back up at the shoulders then. Now that I've got the legs measured out, right about at rib cage height, right about the middle there, is approximately where the elbows fall. So I find the middle, and that's about where the elbows go. And then at about crotch height is about where the wrist goes. So I draw the forearm down and just put a simple box to stand in for where the hand goes. As you notice, anytime I do one thing on one side, I'll intend to do it on the other side. An anatomy video like this would be a lot easier if I just skipped half of the body, but it feels more natural being able to do both sides. So right now I'm simply cutting into the rib cage upwards and cutting into the hip box downwards to create the abdominal chunk, which is basically just a long Twinkie, really. So I've drawn the pectorals in, and the pectorals taper all the way up to the actual bicep bone. They don't actually stop at the armpit, so that's why it sort of leaps off of the rib cage and extends out to that line. Just drawing in the trapezoid muscles here, or the trapezius. Now the deltoids are not just that circular bump at the shoulder, they also extend from the collarbone down to the bicep bone as well. So you get almost like a half circle, or a semicircle that's cut in half. However, just looking at it straight ahead, it looks like a semicircle, just looks like half a circle, but if we were to take an overview from it, you'll see it entirely differently, which I get to here in just a second. And now I'm just sort of flushing out the size of the rib cage. See how it's starting to really thicken up to that 3 heads wide instead of that very basic box I started off with. So let me just create an eyeball here saying this is where we're looking from. If we're looking down at that deltoid on our shoulder, and this over here is going to be the down view, this will be the part of the shoulder where the muscle hangs off of, and it anchors up there and comes down and anchors to the bicep. Within that chunk, that triangle, there's actually 3 separate muscle groups. There's the forward muscle group, there's the middle muscle group, and there's the back muscle group. And as you notice, the back actually extends inward further because it connects deeper into the back muscles. So there's anchor point A and B, A at the top, B at the bicep bone. But all you're seeing really is the front part of that shape as it wraps around. So I've just drawn in a little arc there so you can see that that muscle just wraps around the 3D surface of your arm. So I start to draw on the bicep here. Now the bicep muscle initially, everyone would assume would start at the top where the shoulder is. Unfortunately, it's not actually true. Where it connects is where the pectoral muscle connects to the bone. So the bicep tends to tuck right in there underneath where the pectoral muscle overlaps it. And then the anchorage at the bottom of the bicep comes right into the elbow, just sort of stops right there at the bulk of the shape. Now I'm drawing in the forearms, and I'm doing those second after sort of roughing out the bicep and the tricep, so I'm keeping it all within proportion. and keeping it basically within the same width of the bicep and tricep. So then I just taper down those shapes down to the wrist, and I'm only meeting that hand box halfway in the middle. It doesn't actually come all the way out to where that thumb is. Don't do that. That ends up making the wrist way too wide. So now I'm starting to shape into the tricep area and the elbows. The elbows sort of stick up off of that squash grapefruit shape of your forearms. And if I take another overview here, like an eyeball looking straight down from behind at those triceps, this is how the tricep muscle looks. From the front, all we see is just sort of this 90-degree angle. So if this is our deltoid again, side to side, then what we're really looking at, there you can see the muscle groups of the deltoid I'm shaping in here. Now here's where our tricep muscle starts to extend down to the actual bone. And where the elbow comes up into it, it cuts out of it like a cylinder. So here's the bottom of that cylinder, and here's where it goes up into that tricep and sort of cuts in. So the tricep muscle bulges out towards the deltoid, and it also bulges out towards the back, and there's two separate muscles there. As you notice, it almost kind of looks like a butt crack. It almost kind of looks like butt cheeks. So you've got one side wrapping around, you got the other side wrapping around, but as you shade it, you'll notice when the skin lays over those two separate muscles, those two separate muscle groups tend to sort of flush together as just one shape, which from that angle almost kind of looks like a horseshoe shape from underneath. Almost looks like you're looking up at a horseshoe. So I'm sort of putting in the basic shapes of the rest of the arm here so you can see the bicep going into the forearm. Alright, so now I'm going to start continuing from the forearm and that bicep. There's a muscle that extends again from the bicep bone past the elbow to the outside, and there's one muscle group right there. Sort of curves to the inside here. But there's another one tucked in behind it that actually goes behind the bicep. So from our point of view right now, there's a top layer, which is the forearm muscle. There's the middle layer, which would be the bicep wrapping behind it. And then there's the further back layer, which is the forearm muscle going around behind it. And now I'm just sort of putting in some wrist bones and just giving the subtle hint of a hand that's sort of clenched in a fist shape. We'll do hands, we'll do faces later on. But this one is just sort of an overall look at anatomy. So bicep, tricep, deltoid at the very top there, and these are the quads, and they say they're the quads because there's actually four muscle groups, or at least four major muscle groups in the front. These are the knees, just doing simple little U shapes, and then another simple U shape underneath that. And as you'll notice, I'm following the curve line of the actual shin bone, so those U shapes are sort of tapering to the outside. And now I just grab onto the bottom of each shape and bring it down to a point, and that'll be where the ankle is, on that same shin bone. Simple triangles for the feet here, but you'll notice they're offset. They're a lot wider going towards the outside, so they're contradictory angles. The weight coming down from the shin bone curves inward, and then curves outward for the outside of the foot, which puts most of your weight directly on the ball of your foot straight underneath the ankle, which is split between your big toe and your little toe. Now the illusion is a lot of people think your foot swings outward, but the reality is your foot swings inward. Try it right now. Rotate your foot to the inside. And the only reason why that actually is possible is because your inner ankle is actually higher than your outer ankle. So that's all I'm putting in right there is the inner ankle versus the outer ankle. So that one's higher, and then the outer ankle is lower. And that will actually allow your foot to curve inward a lot easier than it can actually curve outward. You have less mobility curving your foot out than you do curving it in. So now I'm just sort of smoothing out the lines of what are your calf muscles and just bringing the shin bone up into the meat and bringing the knee joint down into the bone. So you really get the sense that there's meat wrapping around the bone. There's some of the bone exposed, but most of the meat is sort of swelling up from it. So you've got the outer muscle and you've got the inner muscle. Now I'm going back up to the quads. Now I'm about to break down the four muscles here. I don't know their names. But one starts right here at the kneecap and it bulges inward. And this is the most notable one. And this one right here comes from actually back by the butt cheek. Not just from the inner side at the groin, but it actually comes from the butt cheek. So there's the right side of that bottom muscle. And there's the anchor point for the third muscle, which starts at the top and goes all the way down to the knee. And there's the side of that upper muscle. There's that back one I spoke of, and there's the fourth one. The fourth one also wraps around from the butt and comes around to the side. Now over here is my simple pencil stroke of how I put down all four muscles in just 4 strokes. 2 down and 2 up. In case you missed it, here's 1 muscle, out and around and up. There's 2 muscle from the top and down. There's 3 muscles, and up there's 4 muscles. And there you go. That's one simple, quick way that I throw muscles on there without having to overly define them. But the right leg will show you all the exact shapes if you want to play with moving around the light source and establishing a shadow on it. Which, for shadow studies on muscles and stuff, we can do that in a separate video later. So now I'm starting to work in the sort of love handles and the abdominal area, establishing the bottom portion of the rib cage. It's actually exposed. Every other part of the rib cage can just kind of fall away. The pectoral muscles are split in the shape of an upside down V, so I just sort of put in that V shape there to separate it. Now the lines I already drew in there for the elbows, for at the waist, and then especially for the hips, those 3 lines right there play perfectly for where the actual ab muscles go. So now I'm just starting to separate those ab muscles into a simple 6-pack, which extend all the way down into the groin, which we don't really need to see. For simple anatomy, this is like a Ken doll, so I just sort of shade that out, because in comic books, that does actually taper in anyway. In real life, comic books might as well just shade it out. Now there's 3 major rib bones that you usually see underneath the pectoral, and all I'm doing is drawing the 3 major muscle groups connect to those rib bones. So I draw the rib bones, and then those right there were the muscles that can contort and expand when you take a deep breath. So I'm establishing the clavicle and then the collarbones. And there's the major arteries or veins and muscle groups that run up into the neck. Here's the trapezius muscles. Now the trapezius muscles start at the neck running down, curve outward, and then point back down again at the shoulder, because it works kind of like a rope. It pulls up the shoulder, so the bulk of the muscle is usually lower. Now I'm just sort of throwing on a quick little gesture of a hairstyle. So when I'm working with very basic anatomy like this, obviously there's not a whole lot of motion. There's no real weight distribution. It's really a very straightforward pose, just to simply lay it out like a simple blueprint. Here's where the muscles go. Now when we start to get into more advanced stuff, we'll start to get into how the lights and shadows fall on the muscles, how the muscles tend to bulk up as the muscles are actually being worked. For instance, doing a bicep curl, you're going to have a lot more expansion in the bicep than you will in your forearms. There will be some forearm muscles expanding, but you're not going to terribly see it. So for the faces and other specific stuff, we'll do those later. So for now, this is a very basic anatomy layout from head to toe, and we'll go into more specific stuff at another time. So, until next time, you can look forward to facial anatomies, headshot anatomies, as well as other muscle studies. Again, this has been Nick Feutz. Feel free to subscribe. Here at Lead-Based Studios, I'm always interested in taking suggestions, so if you have any suggestions on parts that you're caught up on, or things you'd like to see drawn, or demonstrations on, I'd be more than willing to put that knowledge I have to use to help others and see what their styles can become. So looking to help next generations get into drawing. If you have, again, any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave me a comment.